This is one of the interesting things about this when we realized where we were here is this is actually the exact same room we had the very first large workshop in 2002. Anybody, raise your hand if you were there around the round tables and doing the maps. That's great. Look at that. I saw that hand go up. It's hard to miss that hand coming up in the front. Well, thank you all for being here. And this is the session Revisiting the Region's Vision, Central Texas Realities and Results, presented by Envision Central Texas and the Congress for New Urbanism. Wow, that echo is pretty amazing in this cavern. We need more bodies. Try to spread yourselves out a little bit more. My name is Jim Walker. I currently serve as the chair of the board of Envision Central Texas and the executive director of a little nonprofit called the Central Texas Sustainability Indicators Project. I'm really glad to see this many people coming in here. I know there's some other sessions still going on, and it's I guess it's the second or third day of this conference. So thanks for being here. We're going to have a discussion as well as hear from Peter on what it's going to take to make Central Texas a more livable and hopefully more sustainable region, referencing back to Envision Central Texas, but also some broader themes. Before we get into that, though, I'd like to thank the organizers of the conference and the Congress for New Urbanism for making this possible today. And I also want to recognize any elected officials we have. I know there's several in here, but if you all could stand, I want to thank you for your service and your attendance here today. So, come on, stand a little. We know, we all know that in those roles, in those capacities, you all tend to have to make the really hard decisions about the different kind of things that we all talk about at conferences like this. I'd also like to recognize any Envision Central Texas board members who are here today. If you could stand real quick. Anyone own up to it? There you go. All right, thank you for coming here today. That's great. We do have a 67-person board, which makes for very lively board meetings and discussions, which is a joke, by the way. So at this point, let me tell you how we're going to do this today. First, we're going to hear from Peter Calthorpe to provide an overview of regionalism, regional visioning, including his time with Envision Central Texas, and then some specific examples, I think, that he'll touch on. Then I'll give an overview of what has been happening in the region since our visioning work 4 or 5 years ago, what kind of things the ECT has been involved in, what kind of activities we're working on today, as well as looking forward. And then we're going to ask Bastrop County Judge Ronnie McDonald and Leander Mayor John Cowman up to really discuss how rapid growth is affecting their particular parts of the region and kind of reflecting back on that conversation. So I'm going to introduce our speakers, and then we will roll into it. Peter Calthorpe is a principal at Calthorpe Associates, and his work is focused on how regional scale planning and design can integrate urban revitalization and suburban renewal into a coherent vision of metropolitan growth. His firm is responsible for major regional design projects in Portland, Salt Lake, the Twin Cities, Los Angeles, and recently he worked with the Louisiana Recovery Authority to develop a comprehensive plan for southern Louisiana's recovery in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. And I think there's actually a session on that later in the conference as well. He was also a consultant to our own ECT initiative and was a co-founder of the Congress for New Urbanism. He has a long career in urban design, planning, and architecture, and is an influential voice on sustainability and new urbanism around the country. He was named one of 25 innovators on the cutting edge by Newsweek. He also won the ULI's award, the J.C. Nichols Prize for Visionaries in Urban Development in 2006. He's authored and co-authored many books, The New American Metropolis, Ecology, Community, The American Dream, and The Regional City, Planning for the End of Sprawl. I'm going to introduce now our other two speakers so that we can come up with them and really keep the conversation going. Bastrop County Judge Ronnie McDonald is a fifth-generation native of Bastrop County. He was elected in 1999 as the first African-American county judge of Bastrop and the youngest in Texas history. Judge McDonald is a graduate of Texas A&M University, which is fine. After graduating A&M, he went, that's obligatory to do that, you know, when you introduce someone. After A&M, he served as executive assistant to John Sharp and helped to develop and oversee the Family Pathfinders program. Judge McDonald is well known for his community and professional service and leadership and his outstanding motivational speaking. In February 2000, he was named Citizen of the Year by the Bastrop Chamber of Commerce, and he serves as a chairman of the Capital Area Council of Governments and on the executive committee of Envision Central Texas. Leander Mayor John Cowman was elected as mayor of the city of Leander, Texas in May of 2003. He actively promotes transit and quality of life issues by way of his involvement with the citizens in his city, as well as throughout Williamson County and the rest of the region. One of the visions he had for Leander was the multimodal opportunities that would be presented to the city by the extension of rail and regional road systems as well, all coming together in Leander. This vision has recently been demonstrated by the Capital Metro Leander Partnership, which is planning the first transit-oriented development project in the region encompassing an amazing 2,300 acres. And we'll have both the judge and the mayor up a little later. But right now, without further ado, please help me welcome Peter Calthorpe.
Before I get started here, I think it's only appropriate that I honor somebody who's a dear friend and also, I think, the instigator and one of the prime forces and movers behind everything you can see going on in this region in terms of smart growth. And that's Lee Walker, who's been chairman of Cap Metro. Don't stand up, Lee. You'll block everybody's view. But he's here, and he is really the reason stuff has been happening. Well, no. You tend to overstate things, but with Lee, it's very easy. He invites it. He really has been an amazing visionary and powerful force in all this stuff. Now, I'm going to show slides today, and I have to tell you that it's more bar graphs than anything else. So those of you who are looking for images of great new urbanist communities or wonderful urban environments, this is going to be more technical than anything else. How do I get to slides? Just so I can give you a sample of where we're going to start. And also, is there I can't use a laser pointer, can I? No, forget that. Where do we press to start? Oh, there it is. Is it up there? There it is, the first bar graph. Get ready, there will be a quiz at the end of this. So I want you to note all the data. This is actually a very important diagram. It looks at average household energy consumption, read carbon emissions, across the United States, and it varies greatly, but it gives you the orders of magnitude, the relationship between the land use patterns that we shape and our lifestyles and the environmental impact that all that has. So if you start with an average suburban house in America today, close to 30,000 vehicle miles per household per year, and almost, because we have cold climates, hot climates, actually in the Bay Area, the blue bar, which is household energy consumption, driven primarily by heating and cooling, in where I come from is only around 20,000 BTUs per square foot per household per year. National average is like 5 times that. One of the anecdotes there, one of the reasons is we had Title 24 in California, which called for energy conservation in buildings, made them very smart buildings a long time ago. But all that aside, you can see the kind of energy consumption you have. Now, if you go to green, and maybe you could even go greener than a 40% reduction in energy consumption in the house, which is the next bar over. But you can see that your travel behavior stays the same. So you can put solar collectors and do all sorts of cool things and recycle water and do all that good stuff, and it's not really going to have as much impact as a do-nothing, straight-ahead urban house, a townhouse, a condominium. And the reason being, of course, is that there's a dramatically reduced dependence on the automobile, and the building envelope itself is more efficient because it has less exterior surface. And so the national average for energy consumption in multifamily urban dwellings is around 74, and the average amount of automobile use, it literally goes in half. So the best of all options is urban green, which is where I hope we're all headed. I wanted to also, before I get into the Envision Central Texas and Cap Metro and all the rest of that, I wanted to show, because we've now done a lot of these regional plans, exactly what a kind of groundswell, clear trend emerges out of all of these. Now, a lot of people say, well, because I'm doing these studies, they all come out the same. But there's actually a lot of naysayers who police us quite rigorously in the papers and among community groups. And so actually there is a lot of truth in these numbers. But the results are obvious and they are compelling. So I'll give you 3 or 4 regional studies and the results. Salt Lake was fascinating. We started with a simple exercise of where the next 1 million people could go. And you can't read all these bar graphs, but basically people started stacking chips up to represent higher density, and they started placing chips into existing urbanized areas rather than see growth expand into the natural environment around them, which they all treasured, the Wasatch Mountains and the Ochre Mountains and places like that. And so from day one, there's a strong anti-sprawl sentiment, and it's there before you do any numbers or any alternatives or any scenario analysis. But at the same time, there's the one by one, subdivision by subdivision, local community zoning act by local community zoning act, which of course breeds sprawl, and then behind it all, driving it into the chaos that we seem to have arrived at, is the Department of Transportation, which is funding the infrastructure for all of this madness. So we always do this by looking at alternatives. What if, not by positing that there's a perfect future, but just saying, what if the future unfolded in several ways? Let's measure the impacts of each one of these. So there's scenario A and B, which actually show a pretty dramatic difference in the purple is new land area consumed for the next 1 million in this region. And the numbers that come back are pretty dramatic. The difference in the land area consumed alone, if you care about conserving open space, is very, very dramatic, as you can see the slide on the left. And it doesn't really imply a dramatic shift away from what the market wanted in terms of housing needs. And so the scenario B, these are misaligned. Scenario, the third one over, the single family home to multifamily homes, actually matches closer in the smart growth scenario what the market demands. And so that was an interesting discovery. This was one of the earliest ones following Portland. It was interesting to note that the quote-unquote radical smart growth regional strategy actually came closer to meeting the market demand for housing type because of the growing empty nesters, because of larger cohorts of single people and people actually preferring urban lifestyles, that actually the suburban American dream doesn't fit the market anymore. The more compelling case for the legislature there in Utah was the infrastructure cost savings, which are dramatic in all cases. You make more compact communities, they are more affordable to the public sector, and they're more affordable to the individual homeowner. And so it's a win-win from an economic standpoint. And that, of course, plays a big role in thinking through the implications of affordable housing at a regional scale rather than at a project-by-project scale. And so the $15 billion saving there in Utah actually translates into about $30,000 per household of saved cost over that 1 million people. It's a very significant number for many, many people. You roll into that the savings in not having to travel as much in the car and the cost of that, and all of a sudden you start to have more affordable lifestyles. And when all the data was placed out there, the overwhelming response was for smart growth, which is scenario CD. And you can see the typical sprawl scenarios, A, B, actually garnered very little positive reaction. This has all resulted in the quality growth strategy adopted by the legislature, which has these 3 layers, one of which is open space systems and networks, a long-term vision of what really matters in terms of open space and how they're going to preserve it at a regional scale, a layer of centers and corridors, which really move development towards transit-oriented development, and then where the infill development should happen, and where the new growth, the greenfield, which of course always will happen. In Chicago, not quite as an extensive public input and a region which was already very transit-rich, and as you begin to look at the catchment areas of that transit system, you know, it's kind of a no-brainer of what to do in Chicago, and once again, everybody was with it. Now, the interesting thing is that they were able to reduce travel and increase transit and walking. We all knew that that would be the outcome, and of course it is. It's all a matter of degree. But they are important numbers because they justify massive investments. I know that here, the politics of investing in light rail, investing in transit versus investing in highways and tollways is really one of the core political issues locally. And so unless you have data that says this is what you can achieve, and you can only achieve it with a land use companion. You can't just invest in transit alone and expect it to work. There has to be a complementary reshuffling of the land use deck and reformatting of it, and that's really key. This was like in '96, projected future. Look at where all the congestion is, by the way. It's out in the suburbs. It's not in the city, which of course was transit rich and had a nice walkable human scale grid because of course it was designed by intelligent urbanists a long time ago. It's the new areas that are failing almost always in our metropolitan regions. And the Metropolis plan showed a very, very significant reduction in congestion. In LA, where people thought this is not the right thing to even discuss because this is the automobile city, we were able to discover a very interesting thing, which is that they are quite naturally growing a very robust transit network. And here it emerges, the light rail, which is built and being under construction, future light rail extensions. They're still fighting in Orange County, by the way, so politics always plays a big role. And it turns out that the more conservative the area, the less likely they are to have transit. Why would there be such a corollary, I wonder? Commute rail is really the piece that makes LA work because it's such a vast region. This is, a region of 17 million going up to 23 million. I think I've got the numbers right there. So it extends everywhere, but of course, rail, more effective than freeways at spanning those great distances. And future commute rail, a lot of debate about this in California now. High-speed rail from Southern California to Northern California sounds great, but it opens the whole Central Valley up to being basically a bedroom community for the coast. And so there's some really hard land use issues that are embedded in these investments. Sometimes it may be better not to have transit if you can't marry it to the right land use policies. And that's why these two things always have to be seen as totally inseparable. Rapid bus is really the way LA is going to bring back the streetcar. They've chosen BRT, bus rapid transit, over streetcars. They could have done it either way, but that is what really becomes the network at the core that weaves all these larger systems together. Future rapid bus. Can you see those lines at all? Yeah? Oh, that's amazing. And in our analysis, what we discovered was close to half of the new households could be within walking or feeder bus distance of these new transit systems. So about 43% of the future could be transit-oriented development, and a larger percentage of jobs. Very significant when you think of the current trends in that area, the yellow area being the preferred area for that. And of course, this all just brings back the good old days of when LA was a streetcar paradise, effectively, and people would hop on these things and go anywhere, and it was balmy, and you could go from Los Angeles down to the beach, and it was, and of course they were all torn out. The good news is that the right-of-ways are still there, and that's why those avenues are all so big, and they seem overscaled. There's an opportunity to recapture it, and once again, God, I'm getting bored with these bar graphs. But anyway, I bet you can guess what the analysis proved in this particular case. Once again, less vehicle miles traveled, more transit use. It only makes sense. In Portland, where this all started some time ago, I don't know how many of you are aware, I guess I can't show you, but it all started with 1,000 Friends of Oregon who said they were opposed to a new Beltway freeway, which was going on the southwest quadrant of the city outside the urban growth boundary. And they, through this analysis, proved to everybody that instead of building that freeway, they could build the West Side light rail system, and that reorganize the land use, and actually the whole area would benefit. And they succeeded, which is kind of extraordinary. So this network, once again, of seeing the region as an interconnected domain of various hierarchies of transit, and of course density and mixed use clustered along that armature in all cases, and also seeing the region in terms of the green space preserved, which is actually where 1,000 Friends of Oregon started, but they became more holistic in their vision. They stopped just being concerned with preserving open space, and they started thinking about the total system, the social and the political and the economic issues that surround land use, not just the environmental issues. And so now this preceded, I show these pictures because they're so fabulous and dramatic. It precedes the Lutrac plan, which we did in 1990. My God, years ago, something like that. Yeah, no. But this actually preceded. There was a golden era also in the 70s, which some of you maybe were around for, where people tried to reinvent the city centers, especially in the West Coast. It was Portland, San Diego, and Sacramento, all built light rail, all zoned for mixed use, higher density, and all tried to turn their cities back into walkable, human-scale environments. And to a large degree, all three of them did. Portland, the most famous of it. And, you know, the drama of pulling out a highway on the riverfront and putting in a park, of course, but it's more than just symbolic. It's substantive as well as symbolic. It's one of those wonderful combinations where you can do something that has such a strong iconic value, but also in an everyday practical sense makes the city livable, makes the city a place people want to be. And of course, this is true before and after. Pioneer Courthouse Square, from parking structure to one of the most fabulous populated urban plazas in America today, and of course one of the biggest urban nodes. So these are the complements. You have to see this always as a complete system of land use and transportation. One of the fascinating things about all three of those cities who in the 70s went to this model, new urbanism before it was new, sometimes I like to call it, was that they attracted for the first time in maybe 20 or 30 years major regional retail back into the city center. Historically, our city centers where they were where we all went, you know, to shop, to do cultural, but it was the focus and the identity of the region. And then, of course, we lost that with the big malls at the periphery and the ring roads and all the madness that went along with that. And so this was, once again, one of those highly symbolic but also truly functional elements. Regional retail coming back to downtown. Horton Plaza, whether you like it or not, in San Diego. The plaza they always call it the plaza, no matter what city it's in. It's the same goddamn name. That's because they hire people to name it. You know, there's a whole profession out there that does nothing but name things, and they're not very good. The latest iteration, of course, of all this, and you know, for maybe 8 years or so, I stopped talking about Portland because everybody said, well, that's just Portland. It doesn't count. It's in a different planet. But the reality is it does count. It's America, and it's real people doing real things, and they got it right. And the latest iteration is this amazing streetcar system, $10 million a mile. It's what you need in downtown Austin. This whole, the regional transit system will not function here if when you arrive downtown, you're stranded. It's simple logic. It's the way all great cities have operated. You have a hierarchy of regional transit service, but it's got to plug into a very robust local service. And believe me, with the Capitol and the university and all that goes on down here, it's a no-brainer to do this. And I don't know where it is in the status, but the other good news is it's cheap. And I was just driving down Congress Avenue, and there is space there. Believe me, who would have thought of putting diagonal parking at the center of one of the most important cities of the state of Texas that leads you in a grand LA up to the Capitol building? Diagonal parking. It's a semi-parking lot is what that is. Get rid of it. Put in light rail. Get straight. Okay. And Portland has worked. There's actually a little industry of ultra-conservatives that spend all their time, way more time than I have to rebut them, going around the country talking about how Portland hasn't worked. But it absolutely has worked by any measure that you don't contort. It's just these right-wing nuts who are trying to fabricate very specialized data. But here it is. The regional VMT for Portland, notice where it crosses over. It's going along with the national average up till about 95. Well, what was fascinating, and my good friend Andres Dueni we all went to Portland. When was it? I can't even remember. But anyway, he was very critical because the urban growth boundary was not enough. If there wasn't good urbanism within the boundary, if there wasn't a coherent land use program to marry to the transit system, it actually was one-dimensional and it really wasn't functioning. And you can see here, it wasn't functioning. But 1990 is when the 2040 plan went into place. The new transit West Line came into play, and the whole new vision of land use, both in the city and in the suburbs, started to play itself out, and the trend significantly changed to that point. And it's kind of astounding database there. What is that guy's name that goes around all the time? I can't remember his name.
Around the country?
Yeah, it's some here. Yeah, O'Toole, that guy. He's completely out to lunch.
I'm going to take a drink of water.
Okay. This one, as complicated as it is pretty fascinating. Because one of the things that drives new urbanists crazy is the cul-de-sac hierarchy of streets that the transportation industry is foisting on the world. Literally, these days I work around the globe, and it's the exact same road standards everywhere, which is a disconnected system. There's no connectivity. Everything leads to arterials. All arterials lead to freeways, and this is the only way you can move around. And so for areas that were designed and built that way, it's a real dilemma to say, well, no, we're going to add transit, we're going to add mixed use, but if the road network isn't robust and allows direct pedestrian connectivity, doesn't allow cars to disperse over parallel routes, you have a dilemma. Because adding density and adding transit in an environment that doesn't handle the pedestrian well and doesn't handle the automobile well actually can lead to real problems. So can that get changed? And for years I thought, well, that's kind of a lost cause. You know, let's go somewhere else and do it right. Well, it turned out Portland and its neighboring cities passed these ordinances that required any new development. I'm really getting sidetracked here. You better pull me off because I'm going to go way too long. They passed ordinances requiring all new development to add street throughways where there were none, connectivity, so that dead ends became connected streets. And you would think, well, this could have a minor impact. Look at the impacts in Forest Grove there. Percent increases in intersections per mile is the way the new urbanists use to measure how interconnected the street network is. How easy is it to walk around and not find yourself at a dead end? And how easy is it for the traffic to disperse? And so, oops, I forgot. I can't remember the dates on this, you know, what's period of time. Probably erased it. But the fact that they're able to achieve a true turnaround in the nature of the street network is pretty astounding. It makes you feel that maybe there's hope for just about anywhere that we've screwed up in the past. Now, Envision Central. So that's kind of a background of some of the places and some of the ideas and some of the issues. And I think that everybody in this room obviously knows that there are many parallel issues here. Just to put where's Austin in the frame. I love these graphs. They're pretty interesting. The highway miles, lane miles per 10,000 residents in 82 and 01. Austin is pretty high, but it hasn't really changed. You know, as you built a lot up to 82 and you didn't stay there, which is interesting and probably good. You'll notice some areas have been growing roads at a rapid rate. You'll note, interestingly enough, that LA and New York have very small freeway networks or lane capacity. So that's in some ways very counterintuitive, but worth noting. The hours of delay are pretty fascinating also, because if you look here, the actual expansion of congestion is really quite dramatic. It's worse than Dallas-Fort Worth. I don't remember what the number in Houston is. I think Houston beats you in this, but this is the category you'd like to be beaten in. LA, of course, huge increase of travel delay, whereas New York, more than I would have expected, to tell you the truth. You know, the actual role that transit plays in these different cities is pretty interesting also. Of course, New York and counterintuitively LA are doing quite well in terms of, well, obviously New York is off the chart. But these are all points of reference to let you understand where you are. The bottom line, Austin's got a lot of room for improvement. There's a lot that can be done here that will change things. Okay, the regional plan. It always starts with a population figure. You're going to grow, and the question is, how are you going to grow? People sometimes get sidetracked into arguing about, well, how much are we going to grow, or should we limit the growth? But those are really irrelevant questions because there's no legal well, I guess the Republicans want to limit the growth of this country in terms of immigration, but short of that kind of madness, you really can't control. And actually, the better place it is, and this is a great place, the more people want to come and live, want to be here. So, I mean, get ready, because it's going to happen. The question is, how is it going to happen? We, as always, start very soft-footed with a range of alternatives. And this is the classic, this is the ECT plan. And we did a whole series, fairly complex and fairly detailed. I can't go into all of what happened back then. Maybe, Jim, you will. But, here's where you are. This is one scenario of growth. Another one. This one was more, this is more corridor-based, freeway-based. That's actually showing a lot of growth out on the 130. Yeah, business as usual. Yeah, actually, why don't you come up and help me with this? Because I'm not even I don't remember it as well as you do. But as I remember, that was and this is a key issue for you guys, that 130 corridor, the tollway, is going to breed sprawl if you don't do something about it. And it could sink a lot of good efforts elsewhere. And that obviously is what the scenario A1 was. Scenario B was nodal, clustered, but I don't think particularly driven by transit. C was more transit and more nodal, and D was a more extravagant version of that. The polling that took place, and this is all, ECT went as far as presenting these visions, informing the public about what the implications of these visions were, and asking people for their feedback once they had gotten that information. And once again, the polls showed that people preferred a healthy mix, but not so much roads as the framework for the future. And which of those land uses? Quite radical response. The most compact, the most transit-oriented got the most votes. And in terms of housing needs and in terms of transportation. Actually, the housing component came out a little more for scenario C, but these are nuances. You can see the pattern here very, very clearly. Now, following on all that, where you had a broad brush vision and questioning, Cap Metro wanted to move ahead with looking at what its future was, and Lee was kind of at the heart of this, what its future was in terms of providing transit infrastructure. And I convinced Lee that he ought to look at not only transit, but also land use, because you can't see them as separately. So once again, we built this all systems go plan to look beyond the first line. The network here, the purple lines are local bus, and this is the hierarchy, an express bus network that overlays on that, which plays a very important role for bringing people downtown so they can be stranded. This is actually mislabeled. The rapid bus system is not a hard a steel wheel. The light rail comes in its first phase with the north-south line, which, when is that going to open? Soon. All right. Which is very, by the way, it's a great system because all across this country, this DMU technology, which you're going to be pioneering here, is under scrutiny. And it's a very important technology because it's very affordable. And the model that you're pursuing here could have huge impacts across the country because there are lots of underutilized railroad right-of-ways, which is what the Northwest Line uses. Actually, the whole region here has an abundance of underutilized right-of-ways. And so, but this idea of taking old freight lines and using them for transit is a very important concept. And you guys are going to be the pioneer of proving out not only that strategy, but also the technology that can use it most appropriately. And it's a battle. I won't go into the details. And then the issue of the circulator comes back, which is where does all this lead is really at the heart of it. Now, the land use pattern begins at a different level, the parkland, the urbanized land. This is the base case scenario 2030. The Campo 2030 plan, which I'm happy to say now they've superseded, or they haven't quite superseded.
Not quite yet.
But their previous plan was not well coordinated with transit and wasn't as dense or as compact or as mixed use as it could have been. But they did show a fairly robust set of investments. The lines you can see on the map, I won't go into them, were a series of transit assumptions for the framework of the region. Vision 2030, which was the for Cap Metro, looked at a much more nodal pattern with a much more robust transit network. So once again, let's compare land consumed, VMT, transit, all the standard measures, which in a way are very, very significant. They sound technical to most people, but they're very significant to everybody's daily life. Base case, 65,000 acres consumed. Basically, the base case was a more sprawled version than the Campo plan. The Campo plan was heading in the right direction, but you know, we didn't think measuring against something that was not necessarily adopted in a way that it would be materialized was the right measure. The measure of this base case is, let's say you have nothing. You succeed at no comprehensive regional planning. You probably sprawl outward in this pattern. 65,000 acres. The Campo, the Cap Metro plan more than cuts that in half easily, once again, without compromising the market demand and the market type of housing allowed. And the land consumed, interestingly enough, as I said, total is in half. Ag land goes dramatically down. Edwards Aquifer, almost 50% construction on the Edwards Aquifer, which I'll come back to later because I think that's another one of the significant variables that you guys are playing with here. And the recharge zone, both of those under the vision plan, the Cap Metro outline, and I think now the Campo plan is actually fleshing out, reduces the impact on those very important environmental assets and question marks. And it's very important for everybody to recognize that that's one of the benefits here in terms of environmental impact. Now, everybody says this is fine, but it's not the American dream. Everybody wants a big house on a cul-de-sac. It turns out that in the base case, you have been, the existing density here is about 1 unit per acre. You know, it is a very low density sprawling region. The base case of sprawl is 5 units per acre, the green bar, which is kind of what subdivisions are. But when you blend the new growth with the existing growth, the average density of the region is 2, somewhere around 2. And it turns out that if you blend the new growth even at 10 or 11 units per acre, I should get a decimal point in here so we can actually see what the difference is. There's not a big difference. So there's still plenty of inventory for people who want large yards, large houses, maybe they have big families. The issue is really satisfying a market segment that has not been satisfied, which is for smaller homes in more urban areas. Here's a mapping of the Edwards Aquifer and recharge zone, which you all probably understand and know. This is the base case and the way land use impacts that. And this is the Vision 2030 Cap Metro plan, which makes it more compact, but still, and here's the key point, still has development in that aquifer and recharge area, because there's communities there, there's transit infrastructure that's going to be going across it. You can't have a no development zone there. And those purple areas are actually areas that need high density development, not the kind of low density development which is now being prescribed for the aquifer. Okay, another dimension is how many jobs and households go into existing communities. I need to move quickly through this stuff. And you know, this is really one of the big issues, one of the other great benefits of this type of regional thinking and growth, which is the reuse and the recycling of underutilized old infill sites, places that have been passed over. Great example in San Jose that we did many years ago, Jackson Taylor neighborhood, old industrial neighborhood, totally revitalized into a great walkable mixed-use community. There are those assets of being able to reinvest in existing communities. I think, once again, Lee, you always said, the transit system has to be seen as an economic development tool for the communities that it goes through. It's not just air quality, it's not just reduced congestion, it's not just a lesser impact on overall land consumption. It's also a way, as you saw in Portland and many of these other cities, a way of beginning to enhance and catalyze economic development in those city centers. And that's a real important dimension and a part of the equation that we actually can put some numbers to. And corridor enhancements, you've got, how many corridors do you have that looks like that, right? It's all over the place. I can't name it. Can you name them, Jim? Name one or two really bad ones.
At the risk, because I still have to live here, I'm not going to necessarily name them, but they are all over the place. I think different towns have their own.
You see, I'm going to go away, so I can do this as outrageously as I want to. So this is what you need to do to them. It's very simple, and it can happen. It does happen, especially if you add a streetcar. So developing around transit has the following impacts: the numbers of potential. That's too boring. And of course, this idea that every transit station, and I'm going to come back to this because it's fascinating to me, having worked on ACT and then worked on Cap Metro's plan and then worked on a couple of developments in the area. I see how in the end all the grand visions can be frustrated by actually very well-meaning engineers and bureaucrats, but they can totally frustrate the end result. This kind of development that you see here at a station, of course, has a much higher impervious rate than the farmland that preceded it. So the question is that the right trade-off to make? Certainly this is one that scares people, but when you have transit, this is Orenco Station, one of the areas in Portland that was a open field, has turned into a really great community in which renderings and buildings actually coincide. It's kind of an amazing thing. Now, we went into some more detailed modeling, and I may just go through this very rapidly, which get to the transit ridership. That whole section I was just talking about had to do with the land use component. Now, transit, and this low what am I trying to say here? Obviously, in the base case, because you're not investing in transit, there actually is no rapid bus or fixed rail ridership, and you have a very low case. The base case is the Campo plan. It's starting to head in the right direction. It's not great, and of course, the vision shows you what you potentially can do. Once again, the same spectrum of things. Here's one of the more interesting measures, which was when you look at the base case versus the Cap Metro plan, the number of congested miles is reduced by 174,000 hours. The hours of delay, congested miles, excuse me, the hours of delay, 125, and then the daily hours traveled. So these are all very, very important dimensions. And of course, here, as in Salt Lake, as in most places, the infrastructure costs are also reduced. So there's a whole list of benefits that come out of this kind of approach. Now, it seems that this region has paid a lot of lip service to and wants to head in this direction. So I got involved in a project here out on Lakeline, which is going to be one of the major transit stops for the Northwest Line, and also is actually a transfer point. So it's a pretty intense transit hub. And we tried to look across and around for the street connectivity and the access. The transit areas in that red area there, I can't point. And what was fascinating was all the blocks that we came up against. We were proposing a community that was very mixed, but very dense, average density around 10 units an acre, from cottages and green courts to townhomes and multifamily and mixed use. It would all be there. It's kind of straight ahead new urbanism at this point. It's not actually rocket science, and quite frankly, it's proven itself in the marketplace as an end in and of itself. It doesn't even need to be there to support transit, but luckily in this case we had transit. Now the issue became two big ones. This is on the Edwards Aquifer, and one issue was that the impervious surface exceeded the standards for this area. And there was a huge movement among the staff who were well-meaning to actually reduce density here because it caused too much impervious surface. So this balancing gets out of whack, and people, when they don't see the big picture and they make micro decisions at the individual project level, you can often lead in the very much the wrong direction. This was a map of the open space. It was fairly robust. There was detention, retention, but the actual impervious was well well over the standard. Now this I found, interestingly enough, and ultimately we won the day on this, but it was quite a struggle. But this is a federal document that actually looks at, and once again, a scenario system of impervious cover, total runoff, and total runoff per household for 3 different densities. And it turns out the low density has about 18,000 cubic feet per year of runoff. The medium density, 4, that's suburbia, sprawl, has around 6,200. And the higher density, which is the average density we were going to, was 4,900. So there is, once again, a positive trend when you move towards this kind of growth. But it wasn't seen in that light. It was just seen as X% of that site had to be permeable. And that's the kind of myopia that traffic engineers and civil engineers and even planners get into. And they lose the larger perspective of what it is that needs to happen. And so I already went through this. We showed them this and showed that if you don't build compactly, the impacts to the aquifer will be much larger, on the order magnitude twice as high. The second thing is another great example of the myopia of experts and engineers, was the road network. The problem here was the station is in the lower quadrant there. Lakeline Boulevard, the red line, comes through and obviously becomes a huge pedestrian barrier. So we went to the traffic engineers and said, we've got to solve this. Let's put in a boulevard. Let's do something else so that it becomes not just a series of sound walls on a big arterial that divides this community and separates the majority of it from the transit station. Let's somehow use the boulevard as a way of weaving it together. No can do. This was a section. Now, what's critical about boulevards is that you have to have parallel parking. If you don't have parallel parking on it, you can't have a house that fronts onto it because guests need to park in the front. Even if you alley load your garage, there's got to be a way of coming and going from the front. And the standard said, no, you cannot, on an arterial, you cannot have parallel parking. Well, it turns out, of course, you can, but the standards didn't allow for it, and so this was shot down. This is one of the boulevards in Stapleton, a project we've done where people love living there, and the density is right, and the housing fronts onto it. And yes, there's parallel parking on an arterial, and people don't get killed moving in and out of those stalls. But And here's another one. What's fascinating about this arterial, parallel parking allows live-work housing. It actually, the question is, who wants to live on a busy road? Well, it may be somebody who has a home business, who wants the visibility and the easy access. So it's all about adjusting the land use to fit these patterns. But this all kind of strings back to the regional plan, because if you don't have walkable neighborhoods at transit and you carve them up with barriers, or you reduce the density because of the aquifer needs, you don't get the compactness and the accessibility that the whole thing needs in order to work. We finally, over many dead bodies, ended up with a couplet idea, which is one of my favorite ideas. Because you can't park on a 4 or 6 lane facility, we said, well, what if we made each road 2 lanes? Well, they said, okay, you can park on that. So we just made a couplet of one-way streets. Each one was 2 lanes, very nice, allowed all this permeability, bike trails, pedestrian routes, all getting to the station. And that's the street section. And it's really no more than a neighborhood road in dimension. But of course it carries all the through traffic because it's one way, which many of my new urbanist friends don't like, but I think it's better than an arterial by a long shot. So we won that. And this is a built example of how that worked. This project in Southern California, where we took a standard arterial intersection, we blew it up into a grid of one-way streets. And lo and behold, this is carrying 30,000 trips a day in a totally pedestrian-friendly environment. So you have the same volumes as an arterial, but you have the walkability of a very nice neighborhood environment. As a matter of fact, the building under construction there is an elementary school, which comes right up to the street network itself and actually offers up its library as part of the civic amenity of this little village center. And there's the middle of the intersection, much better looking than a bunch of traffic lights, and homes that live directly on what would be throwaway arterials. So finally, here we are with the first couple, I think many actually that I don't even know about, communities coming up. It all started for me working on the Triangle, which was so controversial here. And I don't even know how it's come out. I was actually asking somebody who came up to me earlier about how it is. And I don't know if it came out close. I'm sure it didn't come out close to my design, but it maybe have come out okay. I was mentioning in this one, we were struggling with how to put a big grocery store in there. But the idea of density in a core location like this and a destination that would allow those single-family neighborhoods directly adjacent to it to have a point at which they could go, get coffee, do some shopping, and also get on transit. That's the vision of the infill and redevelopment that we can have. And it looks okay in slides. I'm going to go out there tomorrow and have a look, see, really kick the tires and see whether this thing worked out okay. I know it's not done. Pardon? All right, there you go. And you know, nothing is perfect. That's the other thing. Remember, we always draw our plans and we have high aspirations, but getting 80% of the way there is really, really good. So I want to leave you with these old principles of urbanism. Don't ever forget, you should judge every community by these 4 standards. Is it interconnected at a local and regional scale, or is it isolated? The worst transgression is the isolation of gated communities, age-segregated communities, income-segregated communities. The isolation and lack of connectivity is what kills cities and regions. There has to be diversity and balance. You need mix of uses and people. We know that. And that, you know, it's interesting that that's a principle that works in the city and it works in the suburbs. In the city, it has some very controversial implications. There are many places I work, like downtown Oakland, where in order to achieve density, you've got to build higher income housing, not more low-income housing. But the impulse is always, it's a low-income community, let's build more low-income housing. But all that does is further isolate that one income group and further lead to the kind of economic segregation that our suburban landscape has done such an extraordinary job of enhancing. So every one of these has its battlegrounds. Conservation and restoration, need I say more? The conflict between this impervious and pervious versus deep, dense urbanism on the smaller footprint, as opposed to a more pervious community on a larger footprint. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what the right answer is, but if you look at it project by project, you're not going to get it right. And finally, this whole question of walkability and human scale. These are the four things that I think if you look to, in all cases, you can't get it wrong. Thank you.